Everyone, Lee Pacchia here. We're coming to you from New York Law School today, where we're going to be talking with Professor Leonard on a major decision that just came down from the EEOC on transgender rights. Professor, thanks for joining us.
So, Professor, I wanted to talk to you about an interesting development that crossed my screen the other day. The EEOC came out with what looks like a major decision on transgender rights in this country. Would you see it that way? And if so, could you walk us through what happened?
Well, definitely, because it was directly addressing one of the big sticking points in trying to win fair treatment for transgender people in the context of the workplace. Mm-hmm. And that is the ability to use restroom facilities consistent with their gender identity and to be referred to respectfully by their appropriate gender when people are speaking about them. This case actually involved the U.S. Department of the Army, but a civilian employee of the Army Department. Officially, the Army doesn't allow transgender people to serve in uniform because the regulations that were adopted long ago treat gender identity as a mental illness, as a source of instability, and they feel that transgender people wouldn't be able to fit into a military environment. So officially, transgender people can't serve. But as to the civilian Defense Department, this involved someone who was involved in one of the many activities, research activities of the Department of Defense. And when she was hired, she was presenting as male, with male name, but was diagnosed with gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder, which is the phenomenon of somebody feeling that they're trapped in an alien body. They were born, in this case, Ms. Lasardi was born in a male body, but came to feel very strongly that somewhere a cosmic mistake had been made. And this is the common experience among transgender people. At some point, usually relatively early in their lives, they feel a great discomfort or disconnect between how they feel, their gender identity, and their physical body. And at some point, they may seek to bring the two into concordance by reconforming their body to be consistent with their gender identity. And so she was going through this while being an employee. And as you can imagine, there are difficulties involved in someone transitioning from one gender to the other at work.
Sure.
You know, they have a whole set of colleagues.
It's not a quick process.
It's not a quick process.
Just flip the light switch.
It's time consuming, and people think in terms of sex reassignment surgery. That's pretty late in the process. In an American hospital, to get sex reassignment surgery, you have to jump through an awful lot of hoops to persuade people that this is really genuine, because this is something that is to a certain extent irrevocable. You know, if you're going from male to female, it involves removing genitals, and you can't replace them.
Right.
You can try to simulate them, but you can't replace them. So they want to be absolutely sure that a mistake isn't made here, and someone goes through the entire process and then decides that they regret it and they wish they could go back. And occasionally that happens. But in this case, she went through the process, got a legal name change to a feminine identified first name, changed official documents, got the Department of the Army to change her name and gender notation on her records, her personnel records. And at the time when she was committed to presenting as female, had a meeting with supervisors to discuss how this transition would be carried out and what they would say to coworkers. And the issue of the bathroom came up right away. And this is a real big deal issue, because if you look at the history of transgender discrimination law going way back to the 80s and even the 70s, courts were saying, well, which restroom is this employee going to use? And it might seem like a trivial thing, but if you're in a workplace where you're dressed as a woman, you're not going to go to the men's room, and you want to go to the women's room. And we don't have unisex bathrooms in most workplaces. So which one do you go to? And they don't want you to go to the women's room if you haven't had sex reassignment surgery yet, because now we're going to turn this into an X-rated interview. There are people who say, we don't want anyone with a penis in a ladies' room. And people talk about the possibilities of sexual assault and invasion of privacy and all these other things. So when she was meeting with her supervisors, they came to an agreement, and there's some dispute in the opinion about how voluntary this was on her part, although she did testify that she didn't want people to be uncomfortable. They happened to have in her workplace a unisex bathroom, which was the executive bathroom. It was a single seater, so only one person could be in there at a time, and she agreed to use that until such time as she had had sex reassignment surgery, and this was put into a memo. The problem was that restroom wasn't always available, and it was sometimes out of order. And when you gotta go, and there was no unisex restroom available, so she used the women's room. She was presenting as female. She was dressing that way, grooming that way, and several times she used the women's room, and she was chastised for it by a supervisor. And one of the supervisors she worked with just couldn't seem to accept the idea that she was a woman and kept using masculine pronouns to refer to her and making jokes out of her gender identity. And finally she got fed up with all this and filed a discrimination claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Office of the Army. The civilian part of the Army is covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the portion that is devoted to federal employees. So there's a ban on sex discrimination there. And she made the argument that she was being discriminated against because of her sex, or specifically because of her failure to conform to stereotypes about her sex. And the Army Department EEO office dismissed the idea. It said this isn't appropriate. But the EEOC has been moving on this issue. And a few years ago, they issued their first ruling. It was more of an advisory ruling than a final ruling in a case, because it just involved whether someone could file a claim, not whether the claim was valid. And they said that they felt that the sex stereotyping theory applied under Title VII to cover transgender people from discrimination because of their gender identity. And they took it a step further in this case. They said that once someone has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and has begun the process of transitioning to the point where they are now living in their preferred gender, they are entitled to be treated as a member of that gender, which means access to the restroom facilities.
That strikes me as a
big deal. And just to show you how big a deal it is, this opinion was issued on April 1st. The day before, there was a decision by a federal district judge in Pittsburgh involving a transgender student at the University of Pittsburgh who was expelled by the school for insisting on using the men's room. This was a female to male, exactly the opposite of Ms. Lusardi. So this is a female to male transgender person, and they took the position that until you have had sex reassignment surgery, as far as we're concerned, you're still a member of your gender identified at birth. And therefore, even though you're claiming to be a man, you don't have a penis yet. And you may never, because when the transition goes in that direction, many people reject the idea of an artificial penis. I mean, it's sort of weird. It's scientifically not, the technology isn't quite that advanced. But so Seamus Johnston was not allowed to use the men's room, but insisted on using the men's room. He said, I'm dressed as a man. If I slip into a ladies' room, I'm going to cause a riot. You know, dressed as a man, grooming as a man, looking like a man. I just shouldn't be going into the ladies' room. And he just wouldn't. And they kept telling him, you've got to. You can't, you know, we don't have unisex bathrooms on the campus. You've got to use the ladies' room. And he said, no, I've got to use the men's room. And finally they expelled him. There was a student disciplinary board that voted to expel him, which seemed really odd to me. And the federal district judge said, this isn't under Title VII, because he's not an employee. This is under Title IX of the Higher Education Act, which bans sex discrimination by institutions of higher education that receive federal funding. And the judge says, I'm not bound by Title VII precedent. This is a Title IX case. The issues for students are different from the issues for employees. And furthermore, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over federal cases from Pennsylvania, hasn't issued a ruling on this question yet of whether discrimination against people because of gender identity is sex discrimination. We have decisions from several other circuits, but not for the Third, and not from the Supreme Court. So the federal judge says, look, It's a question of first impression for me, and I think the school has a right to decide who uses which restroom.
It's fascinating that so much of the legal issues here hang upon the issue of which bathroom whoever should be using. I've seen some really intelligent people argue that we're heading to a world where we're going to have unisex bathrooms.
It makes sense. It makes sense. We
Do
can
you
go
think
to
we're
the
heading there?
we can go to the European-style water closet model.
My college operated like that. Wesleyan
No.
University had unisex bathrooms in certain dorms.
Yeah, and
Everyone survived the experience.
now that we have sexually integrated dorms, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in school, it was alternate floors. There was a men's room, then a women's room.
Are you seeing a real move to that world?
Well, it's going to take time because we're talking about infrastructure that has to be rebuilt. We have a new building here at New York Law School, just opened a few years ago, and we do not have unisex restrooms. We didn't anticipate that. And I think at some point, most public institutions are going to want to think about redesign of restroom facilities to accommodate people of different gender identities.
Fascinating stuff. Looks like this is a pretty big decision. What's next?
Well,
terms
next is
of
getting the
transgender rights on
courts.
the horizon?
Well, next is getting the courts to buy into it. And in
Do you
fact,
think they will?
well, that's a big question. I mean, look at this federal judge who issued this decision just the day before. But the Obama administration has committed itself to trying to establish appellate precedents to uphold the EEOC's position before the end of this administration. So they have been selecting cases and bringing court cases around the country. The first one that they brought just settled, and it's nice to have a settlement on behalf of the complainant, but you really want an appellate precedent. It's sort of better if you actually don't get a settlement and you get a case up to the Court of Appeals,
Right.
so you can build precedent. Because every time a circuit court decides it, that sets the issue for several states that are in that circuit. So getting those circuit court decisions, and of course getting the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has only once in its history taken a transgender rights case, which involved a prisoner who was being unmercifully beaten up by other prisoners and things, and it was about the failure of the prison authorities to protect this person. And that was an Eighth Amendment case. So we've never really had a sex discrimination case go to the Supreme Court on transgender rights. They've had several opportunities. They've always denied the petitions. But I think as this issue builds and we have more and more litigation, eventually it's going to have to get to the Supreme Court.
Wild decision. Thank you for coming and talking to us about
Sure.
it. That's Professor Art Leonard from New York Law School. If you'd like to see more of the stuff they're working on here, be sure to go check them out at nyls.edu. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching. See you next time.